The floor went quiet at 6:23 a.m. on a Monday morning, and it did not go quiet the way a floor goes quiet at the end of a shift. That quiet is a good quiet. The exhale of machinery stepping down through its cycles, the particular piece of work completed. This was a different kind of quiet. This was the sudden, total, alarming silence of a system that has stopped in the middle of doing something it was built to do forever. Elias Torres heard it from the far side of the building. He was 40 meters away, walking the secondary press corridor with a coffee he had just poured, and he heard the change in the acoustic fabric of the plant. Not an explosion, not a crash, just a subtraction. A frequency that had been part of the background of his working life for 22 years, simply gone. He stopped walking. He knew before he rounded the corner and saw the alarm lights cycling across the monitoring panel, before he heard the first supervisors calling across the floor, before the PA system crackled to life with Brian's voice asking all operators to hold their positions. He knew with the specific certainty of someone who has spent 22 years listening to a machine exactly what had happened. The hydraulic accumulator had failed. He had been watching it fail for 3 weeks. He had logged it twice. Nobody had acted on the logs. And now 2,000 workers were standing at stopped stations while the alarms cycled and the supervisors made their calls. And Grace Oduya, the plant manager, the woman who ran this operation with the precision and care that had made Hartfield Manufacturing's Colorado facility the best-performing plant in the company's network, was 20 minutes away in her car, driving toward a crisis that had been, for 3 weeks, avoidable. Grace Oduya had been running manufacturing operations for 30 years. She had started at 22 on the floor of a textile plant in Akron, Ohio. The first person in her family to work in industrial manufacturing, the last person anyone who met her at 22 would have predicted would still be doing it 30 years later, with the specific love of someone who has found their work. She had moved through quality assurance and production management and operations leadership with the steady accumulation of a person who is learning rather than simply advancing, who treats each role not as a step on a ladder, but as a complete education in how a different part of the system works. She had arrived at Hartfield Manufacturing 7 years ago. The Colorado facility had been, at that point, the third best performing plant in the company's network. It was now the best. This was not an accident. Grace made things better by paying attention to them, not dramatically, not through grand interventions or restructurings or the kind of bold leadership moves that made good case studies. She made things better by showing up consistently, by understanding the specifics rather than the abstractions, by building relationships with the people on the floor that were genuine rather than managerial, by knowing, after 7 years, the names of every worker on the primary press line and something true about each of their lives. She had managed crises before, equipment failures, supply chain disruptions, the particular intersection of technical complexity and human pressure that manufacturing emergencies always produce. She had managed all of them with the specific competence of someone who has done every job in the chain and therefore knows what each one requires. She had not managed anything quite like this. The equipment manufacturer's support line told her when she called from her car at 6:35 a.m. that they would have an engineer on a video call by 8 a.m., and that the standard diagnostic procedure for a CNC machining center failure of this type would require a systematic review of the primary infrastructure components. Estimated resolution time. Difficult to say without reviewing the logs. Possibly same day, possibly not. The regional maintenance contractor told her he could be on site by 9 a.m. The corporate engineering team in Phoenix told her they could join a video call by 7:30 a.m. She thanked all of them and ended the calls and drove the last 8 minutes to the plant in a particular kind of silence. The silence of a person who is doing arithmetic. 6 days until the delivery deadline. 2,000 workers. A $40 million contract. A machine that had never once failed in the 7 years she had been managing this facility. She parked in the lot and sat in her car for 11 minutes. This was unusual. Grace was not a person who sat in cars. She ran things. She sat for 11 minutes and thought about what she had not yet tried. Then she thought about Elias Torres. Elias Torres was 53 years old. He had been a press operator at Hartfield Manufacturing for 22 years, which meant if you counted the 6 years he had spent at a factory in Monterey before it closed, 28 years of working with hydraulic press systems. And if you counted the years before that, the years in his father's workshop in Guadalajara where he had grown up watching his father work, it was longer still. His father, Rodrigo Torres, had been a machinist for 32 years. He had the hands to prove it. Large, calloused, precise, the hands of someone who has spent decades in dialogue with metal. He had also, more importantly, the philosophy to prove it. A set of beliefs about machines and the people who worked with them that he had held with the conviction of someone who had arrived at them through long experience rather than through instruction. The central belief was this: a machine is not a mystery. A machine is a system, and systems have logic, and if you spend enough time with a system, you learn its logic. Not abstractly, not theoretically, but in your body, in your hands, in your ears, in the specific physical intelligence that accumulates when you are present with something day after day and you pay attention. Rodrigo had taught this to Elias not through lectures, but through demonstration. He would sit his son next to a piece of equipment, an engine, a press, a lathe, and he would say, "Listen. Just listen. Tell me what you hear." And then he would ask Elias to put his hand on the housing and say, "What do you feel?" And then he would show him, slowly and without hurry, the relationship between what Elias heard and felt and what was actually happening inside the machine. He did this for years, starting when Elias was 8 years old, continuing through Elias's adolescence, into his early adulthood. By the time Elias was 23 and working his first factory job, he understood equipment the way musicians understand music. Not as a set of rules to be applied, but as a language to be spoken, with all the nuance and context and intuitive grasp that language implies. He had brought this understanding to every factory he had ever worked in. He had brought it to Hartfield Manufacturing 22 years ago, and in 22 years he had deepened it with the specific knowledge of one machine, the primary hydraulic press system on the main production floor, that can only come from the kind of sustained, daily, attentive proximity that his job description required, and that most people in his position managed without becoming what Elias had become. The person who knew the machine the way his father had known machines. Completely. In his body. He knew its acoustic signature at different loads, the specific layering of frequencies that meant the system was running correctly at 50% capacity, at 75 at full. He knew the vibration pattern of its return stroke and how that pattern changed, incrementally and almost imperceptibly, when a component was approaching a service threshold. He knew the thermal profile of its housing at different stages of the production cycle, and he knew the way that profile changed when the coolant was running at anything other than optimal pressure. 3 weeks and 19 days before the Monday morning when the floor went quiet, Elias had noticed something. The return stroke was running slightly slow, not dramatically, within the normal variance range that the maintenance system used to define acceptable performance. 8%. a delay that would not be visible to anyone who had not spent 22 years learning what 8% felt like. Elias felt it. He logged it in the maintenance system. He described the anomaly precisely. A delay in the return stroke cycle time, first observed on the date he specified, consistent across multiple production runs, within normal variance but trending in a direction that warranted monitoring. The log had been reviewed and flagged as low priority. He logged it again 2 weeks later, when the delay had not resolved. He noted in the second entry that the anomaly was persistent, and that in his judgment it warranted physical inspection of the accumulator system. The second log had also been reviewed and marked closed. Elias had not escalated further. That was not his role. His role was to operate the press and to flag what he observed to the maintenance team. What the maintenance team did with the flag was the maintenance team's responsibility. He understood this. He had always understood this. Standing on the floor at 6:24 a.m. on a Monday morning, watching the alarm light cycle, he also understood that this was one of the moments when the logic of organizational roles produced a result that the logic of organizational roles was not designed to prevent. Tell us in the comments where you are listening from. Please like, subscribe, and share HeartLine Stories. Every subscriber brings more stories like this. Now, back to the story. Grace Oduya walked the floor at 7:15 a.m. She did not walk it the way an executive walks a floor on an inspection, noting things from a distance, forming impressions, maintaining the particular physical separation that signals authority. She walked it the way she always walked it in a crisis, as a person reading a room, moving through the space at a pace that allowed her to see faces and hear fragments of conversation, and register the specific quality of the atmosphere. What people were saying, what they were not saying, where the fear was and where it was not. She had called the equipment manufacturer, the contractor, the corporate team. She had arrangements in place, response protocols initiated, the standard machinery of a major incident response set in motion. All of that was running. She was looking for something else. She found Elias Torres on the far side of the primary press bay, standing next to the stopped engine. He was not looking at it. His head was slightly tilted, the specific posture of someone who is listening. His coffee was in his left hand, grown cold by now. His right hand was at his side, fingers slightly spread, the hand of someone who is about to touch something or who has just stopped touching it. Grace had been managing this floor for 7 years. In those 7 years, she had developed a calibrated, field-tested sense of who on her floor knew things that she did not know. Not skills. Skills were in job descriptions and training records. Knowledge. The kind that lives in people's bodies and their years and their daily proximity to things that matter. Elias Torres was at the top of that list. She had put him there on the basis of one incident, 3 years ago. The hydraulic press had thrown an error that the maintenance team could not clear. Elias had been standing nearby. He had not said anything for several minutes. Then he had said, quietly, to the maintenance supervisor, "The harmonic frequency is wrong. The spindle bearing is wearing. It is not in failure yet, but it will be. 6 to 8 weeks. The maintenance supervisor had checked. He was right. Grace had been told about it afterward, mentioned in passing as part of a weekly operations summary. She had stopped the person telling her and asked them to repeat it. She had asked 2 follow-up questions. Then she had taken out the small notebook she carried and written Elias Torres's name in it and drawn a small star next to it. "Elias," she said. He did not turn immediately. He was still listening. "It is the hydraulic accumulator," he said. Grace went very still. "The pre-charge pressure has been running low for 3 weeks," Elias continued, his voice carrying the specific quality of someone stating a diagnosis rather than offering a hypothesis. "I noticed it in the cycle timing, a delay in the return stroke that was not there before. I logged it twice. It was within variance, so it was not acted on." He finally turned and looked at her. "This morning, the accumulator pre-charged at insufficient pressure, and the system could not build enough force to complete the startup sequence. So, it stopped." Grace looked at him. "How certain are you?" "Certain," he said. The word was not boastful. It was just accurate. If the accumulator bladder has not failed, if it is simply low pressure, you can recharge it and restart. The machine will run. If the bladder has failed, you need a replacement. There should be a spare in the parts inventory. The system carries one as standard." Grace was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she took out her phone. She called the equipment manufacturer's engineer, the one who had been on the video line since 8 o'clock walking her maintenance team through the standard diagnostic procedure, step by methodical step. She had been on 3 calls with him this morning. She had found him careful and professional and thorough. "I have a question," she said when he answered. "If the failure mode were accumulator pre-charge failure due to sustained pressure loss, what would that look like on the diagnostic logs?" A pause on his end, longer than his previous pauses. "That would be consistent with several of the readings we have been seeing," he said carefully. "Accumulator pre-charge failure would be in our diagnostic pathway. We would reach it systematically. It is not a first-step check because it presents similarly to several more common failure modes. We would typically reach that investigation point around day 3 or 4 of standard procedure." "We are on day 1, Grace said. "Hour 1. A pause. "Yes," he said. "Thank you," Grace said, and called her maintenance supervisor. The maintenance team found the accumulator bladder intact but severely underpressured, running at 31% of the minimum required pre-charge pressure. The bladder itself had not failed. The pressure had bled off gradually over weeks through a microfailure in the pressure retention valve, a component that the standard maintenance schedule inspected every 4 months. The last inspection had been 6 weeks ago. The valve had been within tolerance at that point. In the 6 weeks since, it had degraded beyond tolerance, silently and without triggering any of the monitoring thresholds it was supposed to trigger, because the degradation had been slow enough to remain within the normal variance range of the logged metrics until the Monday morning, when the accumulated pressure loss crossed the threshold that the startup sequence required. The spare accumulator bladder was in the parts inventory in its original manufacturer's packaging, purchased 14 months ago as a standard precaution. The replacement required removing the primary hydraulic assembly's lower housing panel, disconnecting 3 pressure lines in the correct sequence, swapping the bladder, reconnecting, and running a pressurization cycle before testing. It took 3 hours and 11 minutes. Elias worked alongside the maintenance engineer for the entire 3 hours and 11 minutes. Not as the person directing the repair. That was the maintenance engineer's role, and Elias did not step outside his role, but as the person who knew the machine, who knew which sequence to use for the pressure line disconnection because he had seen what happened when you used the other sequence, who knew what the pressurization cycle should sound like when it was running correctly and could say, at the 40-minute mark, that it did not sound correct yet and that they should hold before testing. Who could put his hand on the housing after the system had been recharged and say, "This is right. This is what it is supposed to feel like"? The maintenance engineer, a competent, experienced professional named David, who had been working with hydraulic systems for 15 years, did not bristle at this. He recognized, within the first 30 minutes of working alongside Elias, what he was working alongside. He asked questions, Elias answered them. David asked more. By the end of the repair, they were working in the specific harmony of two people who understand different things about the same system and have figured out how to combine those understandings. The CNC Machining Center came back online at 9:47 a.m., 3 hours and 24 minutes after it had stopped. Grace stood at the window of her office and watched the production line restart. She watched the primary press line come back online, the machining arms finding their calibrated precision, the cooling system running cleanly, the axis controllers returning readings they were supposed to return. She watched the transfer systems resume. She watched the auxiliary equipment find its rhythm. She watched 2,000 people on the production floor resume the work that paid their wages and supported their families and kept the company's contract in good standing 6 days before the delivery deadline. The regional contractor arrived at 10:15, reviewed the completed repair, and confirmed it was correct. The corporate engineering team, joining by video call from Phoenix, reviewed the maintenance team's documentation and confirmed it was correct. The equipment manufacturer's engineer, still on his video line, reviewed the repair record and said, with the careful precision of someone who is being accurate rather than generous, that the resolution was consistent with the failure mode and that the repair had been conducted correctly. Grace thanked all of them. Then she went to find Elias. He was back at his station. The press was running. He was doing what he had been doing for 22 years, monitoring its output with the focused, quiet attention of someone who has been listening so long that the listening has become involuntary, as natural as breathing. "Come with me," Grace said. He followed her to the maintenance supervisor's office, a small room at the edge of the production floor, with a window that looked out onto the line. Grace pulled up the maintenance log on the supervisor's terminal. She navigated to the date, 3 weeks and 19 days ago. She found Elias's first entry. She read it carefully, word by word. Then she found the second entry, from 2 weeks later. She read that one too. "Elias," she said. "Yes. These entries describe exactly what happened this morning." "Yes." The anomaly in the return stroke. The accumulator. If someone had acted on these entries, the accumulator would have been inspected, he said. The pressure valve would have been found. Oh, the bladder would have been replaced before it reached the failure threshold. The press would never have stopped. Grace looked at the logs for a long moment. The timestamps. The precise language Elias had used, not dramatic, not urgent, just accurate. A delay of approximately 8%, first observed. Consistent across multiple production runs. Warrants monitoring. Warrants physical inspection. "Why did you not push harder?" she asked. Not accusingly, the question of someone who genuinely wants to understand. "Because logging is my role," he said. "What happens after the log is not my role. I do not know how to push harder without stepping into a place that does not belong to me. And if you had stepped into that place..." He was quiet for a moment. "I would have been told that I was not a maintenance engineer," he said, "that I should log what I observe and allow the appropriate team to evaluate it. And they would have been right. That is the procedure." Grace looked at the window. At the production floor beyond it, running now, the specific normalcy of a resumed operation. "The procedure," she said, "cost us 3 hours and 24 minutes of production. It cost 2,000 people a Monday morning. It could have cost us the contract." "Yes," Elias said. "And you saw it coming." "Yes." 3 weeks ago." "Yes." Grace turned away from the window. She looked at him. at the man who had been standing next to this machine for 22 years, filing precise observations into a system that was not designed to hear them. "I want to change something," she said. She drove him home that evening. Not because he needed a ride. He had a car in the lot, the same car he had driven to work for 11 years, a reliable and unremarkable vehicle with 200,000 miles on it and a small metal cross hanging from the rearview mirror that had been his mother's. She drove him home because she wanted a conversation that could only happen outside the formal structure of the plant, without the specific weight that manager-to-employee conversations carry inside the building. They sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes before they left, because Elias said he needed to call his wife and tell her he would be late, and Grace said, of course, take the time you need, and they sat in a companionable quiet while Elias made the call. On the drive, Grace said, "Tell me how you learn to hear what you hear." Elias was quiet for a moment. Not because the question was difficult, but because the answer mattered to him and he wanted to get it right. "My father," he said. "He was a machinist. He believed, truly, deeply believed, in the way some people believe in their faith, that if you spend enough time with a machine and you pay attention, the machine tells you what it is doing. Not through the readouts, not through the sensors. Through the way it sounds and the way it feels and the way it moves when something is different from what it was before." "When did he teach you this?" "When I was a child. He would sit me next to whatever he was working on and he would say, 'Listen. Just listen.' And then he would ask me what I heard, and he would show me what the sound meant." A pause. "I thought it was just something my father did. I did not understand until I was much older that it was a form of knowledge, that most people do not hear what he heard, what I hear. Most people are not paying attention the same way. Most people are paying attention to something else," Elias said, "to the output, to whether the numbers are in range. They are watching the machine through the data, not through the machine itself." Grace drove for a while in silence. "Are there others on the floor who know things the way you know things?" she said. "Yes." "Who?" "Sandra, on the transfer line. She has been there 18 years. She can hear bearing wear before the vibration sensors catch it. She told me once she noticed it 3 weeks before a bearing failed. Nobody believed her until after." He paused. "Tomas on the press loading system. 12 years. He knows the timing rhythms of that equipment better than the maintenance team. He once told me that a specific part of the cycle was running 3 seconds long, and that something was wrong in the feed mechanism. Maintenance checked and found a misaligned guide rail. It was about to cause a jam that would have taken half a day to clear. And nobody has a formal channel for that knowledge." "No," Elias said. "There is the maintenance log, but the maintenance log is a form. You write what you observed. The form goes into a system. The system is read by someone who is evaluating dozens of entries against variance thresholds. If your entry is within variance, it is closed. What you actually know, the context, the history, the sense that this variance means something different from normal variance, that does not fit in the form." Grace nodded. "I want to build something," she said. "A formal process for capturing what you and Sandra and Tomas know. Not a better maintenance log. Something different. Something that treats what floor operators know as actual diagnostic data. That routes it to someone qualified to evaluate it on its own terms. That creates accountability for acting on it. That would require someone to believe that what we know is worth acting on," Elias said. "I believe it," Grace said. "I believed it before today. Today just made it very clear what the cost of not acting on it is." Elias was quiet for a moment. "The other operators," he said. Sandra and Tomas and the others. They will need to believe that what they say will be taken seriously, that they will not be told they are not maintenance engineers and to log what they observe. That is part of what I am building, Grace said. He was quiet for a moment more. Yes, he said, I will help. The Operator Intelligence Program launched 6 months later. The name was Grace's. The structure was Elias's, built from 22 years of understanding what floor operators actually knew and how they knew it, and from many conversations with Sandra and Tomas, and 7 other floor operators who had been carrying the same kind of knowledge in their hands and their ears for years without any formal channel for it. The program was, in its essentials, simple. Floor operators submitted diagnostic observations through a dedicated channel, not the maintenance log, a separate system, that routed to a review committee consisting of the maintenance supervisor, a senior maintenance engineer, and a floor operator representative. The committee met weekly. Each observation was evaluated not against variance thresholds but on its own terms, with input from the operator who submitted it. Observations that the committee judged to warrant action were escalated to the maintenance schedule within 24 hours. The program captured 47 pre-failure indicators in its first year, indicators that standard monitoring had not flagged. 47 times, someone on the floor had noticed something and that noticing had been heard and acted on. 3 of those 47 turned out to be significant. Significant enough that the maintenance team, when they investigated, found imminent failure modes that would have produced production stoppages ranging from 2 hours to 2 days. $800,000 in estimated downtime costs that did not happen. Elias was named Lead Operator Technician, a new role, created specifically for what he actually did, sitting between the production floor and the maintenance team, formalizing the knowledge transfer that had previously happened informally when Grace happened to walk the floor at the right moment. The compensation adjustment that Grace had fought for with the corporate team reflected the actual value of the role, a 31% increase from his previous rate. At the program's 1-year anniversary, Grace presented its results to the corporate board. She did not present the 47 observations or the 3 significant findings first. She presented the maintenance log entries, the 2 that Elias had filed 3 weeks and 2 weeks before the Monday morning when the floor had gone silent. She put them on the screen. She read them aloud. She explained what they described. Then she showed them the cost of the morning when those entries were not acted on. 2,000 workers stopped, 3 hours and 24 minutes of production lost, the contract that had come within 6 days of missing its delivery deadline. Then she showed them the program, what it had produced in its first year, what the 47 observations had prevented. The board approved expansion to 5 additional plants in the company's network. Elias gave a short speech. He had been asked to speak and had agreed, though he was not a natural speaker and had thought about what he wanted to say for several days before deciding that the most important thing was to say it plainly. "The machine tells you everything," he said. "My father told me that when I was 8 years old. He was a machinist. He believed it the way people believe in things that are true. I have been listening for 45 years, and I have never found him to be wrong." He paused. "The question is not whether the machine tells you. The question is whether there is a place for what it tells you to go, whether the people who hear it have somewhere to put what they hear. We built that place. That is what this program is." He stepped back from the podium. The room applauded. After the presentation, during the reception, David, the maintenance engineer who had worked alongside Elias on the repair 10 months earlier, found him near the edge of the room. "I want to tell you something," David said. Elias waited. "When we were working on the repair that morning, the way you knew where we were in the process, The way you could hear when the pressurization cycle was not right and when it was. I have been doing hydraulic systems for 15 years. He paused. I learned something that morning. From you. And I want you to know that. Elias looked at him. My father would say, Elias said, that there is no shame in learning from someone who has spent more time with something than you have. He said that is just logic. David nodded. Smart man, he said. Yes, Elias said. He was. He drove home through the evening traffic with the radio off. He did not need the radio. He was thinking about his father, which he did more often now than he had in the years before the program, before the board presentation, before the specific feeling, new to him, still slightly unfamiliar, of being in a room where what he knew was being treated as the thing that had mattered. His father had spent 32 years as a machinist. He had been a valued employee, always. Skilled, reliable, present. He had never been asked to present to a board. He had never been given a new title or had his knowledge formally recognized as a category of expertise. He had simply known things and applied them and gone home. Elias had spent 22 years at Hartfield Manufacturing doing the same. What was different now was not that Elias knew more than his father had known. His father had known at least as much. What was different was that someone had built a place for the knowing to go. That was all. That was everything. He pulled into his driveway. The lights were on inside. His wife Maria was in the kitchen. He could see her through the window, moving with the easy economy of someone doing familiar work in a familiar space. His oldest son's car was in the street, which meant he had come for dinner without calling ahead, which he did sometimes. Elias sat in his car for a moment. He thought about his father putting his hand on a machine in Guadalajara 35 years ago and saying, "Listen, just listen. Tell me what you hear." He thought about what it had cost to carry that knowledge for 22 years in a maintenance log system that could not hear it. He thought about what it had cost, for one Monday morning, when the log system's inability to hear it had finally become visible. And he thought about the 47 times in the past year when it had been heard. He got out of the car. He went inside. This has been a HeartLine Stories original. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Write to us at heartlinestories@gmail.com. Every heart has a story worth telling. This is HeartLine Stories, where yours matters.